So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Value of Water Coalition and frame up some of what's happening around water infrastructure issues nationally, and then we'll turn to a really excellent panel here to talk about what's happening in Chicago. The Value of Water Coalition is an alliance of some of the largest public and private water agencies, firms that are building infrastructure projects, and national organizations. We focus on building national will for investment in water infrastructure and water resources. Having worked on transportation issues actually before coming to the water sector, it's been really phenomenal to me how much we as Americans take water for granted. We turn on the tap, clean drinking water comes out, we flush our toilets, the water goes away, and we really don't think about the 1.5 million miles of sewer pipes, water pipes that help make that happen. And that's an amazing number to me, 1.5 million. That's actually 30 times the state of the interstate highway, 30 times the size of the interstate highway system. And so at the Value of Water Coalition, we're really focused on helping the nation understand how fundamental water is to the economic, community, environmental well-being of this nation. We need it to, make a cup of coffee. We need it to fight fires, grow food, produce life-saving medicines. Does anybody actually know how many gallons of water it takes to make a pair of jeans? 2,900 gallons, 2,900 gallons. What about a gallon of milk? Anyone? 880 gallons to make 1 gallon of milk. And so water is fundamental to everything it's a critical input to everything that we enjoy and experience in life. And the water infrastructure and water resources at risk, we're having a whole half-day discussion about that. You know the statistics probably as well as I do. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave water infrastructure a D. I think we're actually, transportation I think is maybe a D+. A water main breaks every 2 minutes in this country. So, the water infrastructure challenges are significant. Certainly here in Chicago, we'll hear a bit more about that shortly. But in addition to water infrastructure, we also have significant water supply challenges. Certainly the drought in the western states is making that top of mind for people right now. But beyond the sort of weather events that we're experiencing now that come and go, water, with the growing population, finite water supplies, we really are moving into a new era of water scarcity. And in fact, in January this year, the World Economic Forum, in their list of sort of annual global risks report, found that water crisis is the #1 risk that we face globally. So the challenges are significant, but I think what we're also seeing around the country, and certainly with Infrastructure Week, Infrastructure Week is really an opportunity to highlight all of the innovation, creativity, and advances that we're making. There's a paper that we produced this week that spotlights some of that innovation in water around the country, from Chicago to Cleveland, San Francisco, the Twin Cities. So hopefully you will check that out, and as we get into the discussion, we can talk a little bit about that as well. With that, let me introduce our panel. We're going to first hear from Susan Hedman, who is the administrator of Region 5 EPA, and will really be providing us with some broad context regionally about both the challenges around water, but also the good work that's happening. Then we'll hear from Alexandra Quinn, who is the Director of Sustainable Economics at AECOM. I've actually had the opportunity to work with Quinn when I was at the San Francisco Utilities Commission, and he's doing really phenomenal work around triple bottom line analyses and other things, so he'll talk with you about that. And then we're going to hear from Dave Stoneback, who is the Director of Utilities for the City of Evanston. In looking at Dave's bio, I see a gentleman who's had a really career-wide commitment to water, sewer here in the region, and so he's going to share some of the innovative work that they're doing in Evanston. So please welcome our panel.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about the work that the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is doing with our federal, state, and local partners to improve wastewater and stormwater infrastructure in the Great Lakes region. This morning, I'll focus primarily on our work with municipal wastewater treatment facilities, especially our efforts to eliminate combined sewer overflows and to reduce urban runoff. So let's start with municipal wastewater treatment plants. Some of you may remember when some Great Lakes tributaries used to look like this photo, which shows soap suds on the Milwaukee River in 1965. Scenes like this were quite common around the Great Lakes until states put restrictions on phosphorus in cleaning projects, and the federal government provided construction grants to fund billions of dollars for municipal wastewater treatment plants. Today, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency provides funding for wastewater infrastructure improvements through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. And I'm very proud to point out that when President Obama took office, EPA significantly increased the amount of money available through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, particularly during 2009 and 2010, using American Recovery and Reinvestment Act resources. Unfortunately, the cost of meeting our water infrastructure needs far exceeds the amount of funding available through the state revolving loan funds. And as you heard, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers, the people that gave us those grades, capital investment needs for the nation's wastewater and stormwater systems are estimated to total approximately $300 billion over the next 20 years. Over a third of that investment is required in just 5 states. EPA estimates that Illinois needs almost $20 billion of investment in wastewater and stormwater infrastructure, and most of that need is focused in the Chicago area. Major investments in wastewater and stormwater infrastructure are urgently needed to address combined sewer overflows. This is a big problem throughout the Great Lakes Basin because so many communities in this region have combined sewer systems that allow stormwater to mix with wastewater. Here's a map that shows just how widespread combined sewer systems are in this region. The combined sewer problem is compounded by the increased amounts of precipitation that we've been seeing in many parts of this region during recent years, and the increased frequency of extreme precipitation events, especially here in the Midwest. These rainfall trends are well documented in the National Climate Assessment, and the combined sewer overflows that follow extreme precipitation events are often chronicled in the press. Reducing combined sewer overflows is one of my top priorities, and I'm very pleased to be able to report that during the time that I've been regional administrator, we've been able to work successfully with our state and municipal partners to finalize consent decrees with 9 sanitary districts that serve CSO communities in the Great Lakes region, including Toledo, Ohio, where the city is implementing measures that will prevent the release of over 600 million gallons of untreated sewage into Lake Erie each year. In 2011, we finalized CSO consent decrees with Euclid, Ohio, and Cleveland. The Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District consent decree was one of the first in the country to require the use of green infrastructure, along with conventional gray infrastructure, and it will prevent nearly 5 billion gallons of untreated sewage from discharging into Lake Erie each year. In 2011, we also finalized a consent decree with South Bend, Indiana, which was followed in 2012 by a consent decree with Elkhart, Indiana, and then just last year with a consent decree with Mishawaka, Indiana, which, like South Bend and Elkhart, is located on the St. Joseph River, a major Lake Michigan tributary. These three consent decrees, there's the St. Joseph River. These three consent decrees will together eliminate an annual discharge of over 1 billion gallons of raw sewage. In 2014, we also finalized a consent decree with the city of Akron, Ohio, which will prevent over 2 billion gallons of untreated sewage from reaching the Cuyahoga River and Lake Erie each year. And last year, we also finalized consent decrees with Lima, Ohio, and the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Chicago. Here in Chicago, our CSO settlement will prevent over 200 million pounds of pollutants from entering area waterways each year. And the settlement requires the district to rapidly expand the reservoir system used to hold untreated stormwater. In fact, the consent decree requires MWRD to triple existing storage capacity for untreated water within 3 years. During the past 5 years, we've made a lot of progress on combined sewer overflow problems. Consent decrees that Region 5 finalized in just the last year will prevent over 73 billion gallons of raw sewage from entering our waters each year. That being said, there are several combined sewer communities in Region 5 where we're still working to get a consent decree in place, and most of them are in the Great Lakes Basin. These communities are highlighted by the red dots on this map. They're Gary and Hammond, Indiana, and Elyria and Lakewood, Ohio. We're committed to finalizing consent decrees with these communities by 2016, and we'll continue to monitor implementation of all of our existing CSO consent decrees to ensure timely completion of the projects and operational measures set out in the long-term control plans that have been approved in connection with those decrees. The CSO consent decrees require Region 5 communities to make roughly $12 billion in water infrastructure investments, which historically has meant primarily gray infrastructure such as tunnels, basins, and storage tanks. During the past several years, however, EPA has increasingly encouraged communities to use green infrastructure components in their long-term control plans, like this example of combined sewer overflow reduction project in Cleveland, which is increasing infiltration of stormwater and reducing the volume of CSO discharges. Green infrastructure measures, such as permeable paving and rain gardens, capture and store rain where it falls, instead of allowing stormwater to drain into overtaxed sewer systems. And because green infrastructure sometimes turns out to be more cost-effective than gray infrastructure, our recent CSO consent decrees allow communities to substitute green infrastructure for gray infrastructure projects when the community can show that green infrastructure is at least as effective as a gray stormwater management measure. To facilitate these green infrastructure improvements during the past several years, EPA has been setting aside 20% of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund capitalization grants for green infrastructure projects. I should note that green infrastructure is not just a tool that helps with combined sewer overflow problems. These projects also produce other benefits, such as creating parkland, reducing urban heat island effects, and preventing urban runoff, which is a significant source of water pollution in densely populated areas along the Great Lakes. To encourage shoreline cities to expand green infrastructure investments, EPA has started to offer municipalities Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding for green infrastructure projects that promote Great Lakes water quality. Last year, EPA awarded Shoreline Cities grants totaling just under $7 million to the 16 cities shown on this slide. This year's Shoreline Cities Green Infrastructure Grant solicitation targeted cities with populations under 50,000, and we'll be announcing those grants later this month. EPA recognizes that Shoreline Cities grants and state revolving fund loans will not cover all of the costs of meeting our wastewater and stormwater infrastructure needs. To begin to address this shortfall here and around the country, earlier this year, EPA announced the creation of a new Water Infrastructure and Resiliency Finance Center. And as you can see in this photo, Vice President Biden joined EPA Administrator McCarthy for this important announcement. The new EPA Water Infrastructure and Resiliency Finance Center will serve as a resource for communities seeking to improve wastewater, drinking water, and stormwater infrastructure by developing new innovative financing models, including public-private partnerships, to better leverage federal funding to increase investment in the water sector. Just last week, EPA brought on a new senior advisor to stand up this new center, Jim Gephardt, who served for over 20 years as Chief Financial Officer of the New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation. The center will bring together investors and municipalities seeking funding for water infrastructure projects, and it will expand technical assistance to communities and offer peer-to-peer learning opportunities, workshops, case studies, and toolkits for financing alternatives. The EPA Water Infrastructure and Resiliency Center will prioritize financing for climate-resilient water infrastructure projects through integration of water efficiency, energy efficiency, water reuse, and green infrastructure. EPA's Environmental Finance Advisory Board will advise the center, and initiatives of the center will be closely coordinated the work of EPA-supported regional environmental finance centers across the country. EPA also recently solicited applications for new funding for regional environmental finance centers to provide communities with finance-related training, technical assistance, finance studies, and other analytical support to help develop sustainable wastewater and stormwater infrastructure. EPA's new Water Infrastructure and Resiliency Finance Center and our regional environmental finance centers support the President's Build America Investment Initiative, a government-wide effort to increase infrastructure investment and promote economic growth by creating opportunities for state and local governments and the private sector to collaborate to expand public-private partnerships and to increase the use of federal credit programs. Last week, as part of the Build America Investment Initiative, the White House convened some of the nation's leading thinkers on infrastructure planning at a roundtable co-sponsored by the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations to highlight opportunities to foster economic growth and to increase resilience to climate change, opportunities that are described in this new federal guide to infrastructure planning and design, which lays out principles developed by EPA and other federal agencies to guide the work of local and state governments, public and private utilities, and planners around the country. We have a lot of work ahead of us to meet our water infrastructure needs, and financing that work is going to be a major challenge. EPA looks forward to working with all of you to develop innovative financing tools and public-private partnerships to better leverage existing federal funding to address our wastewater and stormwater infrastructure needs here in the Great Lakes Basin and around the country. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Alexander Quinn. I'm Director of Sustainable Economics for AECOM in the Americas region. I'm here to speak a little bit about what are the consequences associated with investments, and then talk a little bit about how we make decisions of what investments we should make in as it relates to water infrastructure. So, one thing that we did with Radhika, I guess a year ago, was we realized it was important to elevate the discussion related to our water infrastructure needs. So we undertook a study of roughly 30 agencies, including here in Chicago, to evaluate their associated spending and economic value to their metropolitan region and to the U.S. overall. And as part of this analysis, we looked at their full spend, both operating and capital, year over year out to 2020. What this doesn't show is the larger economic value associated with water. It seems such like a dumb question to ask in the first place. The reality is water is really important. We're all drinking it right now. We probably couldn't survive more than 2 days without water. Guess what? It's very important. So sometimes my job is incredibly easy in terms of economic consequences. Value is important economically. But if you just look at the amount of economic injection those investments make, it's roughly around $520 billion in aggregate is how much that results in economic consequences to the nation. And this is something we presented to the U.S. Senate. That puts it somewhere above the economy of Baton Rouge, just the water utilities that we looked at, those 30 ones. It's slightly below Honolulu, but in terms of GDP productivity, we're talking significant, just those utilities. When you look at specifically the job generation, it's around 290,000 jobs per year in total, when you look at the direct, indirect, and induced economic consequences. And in Chicago, just the investments that are occurring here from the Department of Water Management, it's around 14,000 jobs. So that's no small potatoes. If you think about it in terms of employment, we're talking about the amount of employment that's above the cities of Sacramento, Pittsburgh, and just slightly below Denver. So again, pretty important just from an economic investment into our region and into our economy. If you look at it on a per dollar spent, you get around, for every $1 million of spending, you get around 16 jobs. And if you compare that to, if we just give you guys tax credits, or we say, here's your tax break, how much is that worth in terms of economic generation? It's somewhere around 14 jobs. So in terms, it's where we actually have the best halo effect is actually more on the infrastructure side. And obviously this is not including all the compounding consequences of having robust water infrastructure and what it means to the economy. This is just in terms of the direct spend and the associated consequences from the economy. But I would ask you this: what's the value of water when you're watching your city burn down and you have no water mains to put out the fire? This is in 1908 during the 8th earthquake in San Francisco. And as you can see here, there are people just watching as the fire goes up the hillside in San Francisco because the water mains all broke to the city. And so at that point, the value of water was incredibly high. So as an economist, I would say supply and demand, I'm sure that the price of water at that point was very high. And just to keep that in mind is that we don't necessarily think about things until the crisis moment. Until we are at that point, the reality is that, oh, it's not there, all of a sudden we need it. California is a perfect example of that. And where we are at right now, and the value of water is going up as a result. And this results in action. In 1908, they had an engineer, Michael O'Shaughnessy, which resulted in the O'Shaughnessy Dam, which is Hetch Hetchy system, which is the water that is delivered to San Francisco today. So the point to be made here is that sometimes these crises actually lead to action. Now I'm going to flip totally to a different discussion, and that is really about triple bottom line analysis. It's something that we've been doing for the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission and elsewhere. Triple bottom line analysis is basically taking the concept that we used to do as engineers, just looking at performance and costs, and only looking at that side to figure out which projects we should choose. Now we're incorporating what are the societal and environmental consequences in tandem to those performance and cost questions. And so there are a number of cities around the country that are doing this. Portland, Cincinnati, Melbourne, well, Melbourne's in Australia, New York, and San Francisco as well. They're all doing different forms of evaluations that account for that societal and environmental consequence in addition to just what's the price and what does it do. And in San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, we were faced with significant problems in terms of aging infrastructure. We have sea level rise already, believe it or not. We have king tide events where that reach in and push the water back, and so that the drainage goes back into the cities, and you have manholes that explode. And the result is that you've got combined sewer overflow in certain locations. Those red, or those orange, I guess, boxes are essentially the storage tanks. So when the water flows down from the hillsides, it stores there, and we try to hold it as long as we can and treat it. But when there's a major rainstorm, like a 5-year event, what happens is that flows right into the bay and into the Pacific Ocean. So we have a series of things that we have to achieve, and they have basically said we have a $6.8 billion capital initiative over the next 15 years to help fix the system and reduce the problem. In the case of developing that system, we set out, I'm sure you guys can read all of this right now, but first thing that we came to was that we weren't going to just look at cost, and we weren't going to just look at their performance. We were going to account for a bunch of other items, and that's really this basic principle of triple bottom line. And we had a series of rules that we set up in developing the model, and it was the hardest one on that list is simple. To make a triple bottom line analysis that the community can understand, that Joe Public can say, oh, this is a societal consequence of our investments, that was by far the most important thing that we needed to achieve. So this is what we came up with. And it's basically social is the little people, the dollar signs are obviously financial, and the leaf is environmental. And we try to elevate it rather than talking about the specific numbers, but understand the associated outcomes that the public cared about. In this case, it's construction impacts, land use, employment, system resilience, which is things like responding to earthquakes and flooding, and water use. And we also kept it in an ordinal term. So in other words, there was a color gradient that we used that was, this is really bad and this is really good. Blue is really good, red is really bad. And that's because we didn't want to imply the precision that did not exist at the time of our evaluation. I would warn everyone here that false precision is one of the reasons that we get in trouble as engineers. We sometimes don't know enough to be able to describe exactly what the consequences of our investments will be. But we know enough to say, this is going to be better than that one. And this is really what this is trying to achieve. And there's a number of indicators underneath. I mean, I'm a wonky economist, so as a result, we have to have a series of calculators essentially to allow us to come up with this evaluation system. And this was specific to San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. So I give you an example. This is at Folsom and 17th Street in San Francisco. You do not step in that water. That's actually a combined sewer and stormwater event. I would recommend not stepping in puddles in San Francisco on a general basis because you will find things in there. What this is, it's about 4 blocks from Mark Zuckerberg's house, and it's something that they want to fix. So they were looking at possible opportunities. And one is to take a Rec and Park parking lot, put a storage basin underneath that, and hold the water under there and create a park on top of it. The other would be to just take a parking lot and just put a storage facility underneath that without building a park. And then we could just rip up Folsom Street and put that storage facility underneath there. Or the fourth one, we could do a green infrastructure street on the right, or a rain garden over here. So this is what the public saw in the end. So I ask you, public, what would you choose? Remember, blue is good, red is bad. Project 1. That's a trick question, actually. So yes, Project 1 is typically what we recommended. It has all sorts of associated co-benefits. It includes adding additional recreation space in an area of need. It adds bicycle and pedestrian improvements to that site and improves water quality. It has additional ecological benefits associated with that project. However, if the commissioner said employment, which is S3, that's that dark blue, is the most important thing that they care about, then they could choose that one. Essentially, there's no value set being said by the staff about which one they choose, because we don't have the license to say that employment is more important than water quality. So what we're showing is the consequences of our investments, but not necessarily putting any value judgment of which one is better than most. And what's critical about this is that is a political decision, that is not a staff decision. So just in terms of when you do these evaluations, it's critical to think about that in terms of what license you take and how do you describe your consequences of your investments. Thanks.
Good morning, I'm Dave Stoneback. I'm the Utilities Director with the City of Evanston. I've been with Evanston for 30 years, and today I just want to talk about a couple case studies that Evanston has done to try to improve its infrastructure in different means. The first item I want to talk about is because Evanston is in the sanitary districts region, and we take water from Lake Michigan and it gets down to the Gulf of Mexico. The Illinois Department of Natural Resources has required us to limit our water use, be very conscientious of it, and they used to have a formula for unaccounted for water, and they have changed that to being non-revenue water, and then that will have an impact on Evanston. And we tried to do several things on that. The first was that we installed a new AMI system throughout Evanston. We have 14,400 water customers, and this allows us to read their water meters on a daily basis, but more importantly, it allows the customers to go in through a web portal to recognize how much water they're using and compare that to other residential properties and determine whether they're using more water than the next neighbor. And then they also can set up their own leaks alarms. So as a municipality, we could see a big difference in water usage from day to day as well. But if you were out on vacation for 2 weeks and you came home and all of a sudden you used 200% more water than the day you did when nobody was there, that would be a leak for us, but it wouldn't be a leak for that homeowner. So this allows them to determine their own variables for when they want to set up their leak alarms. The other thing that we spent money on was to replace the master meter leaving our water treatment facility. It was a 48-inch Venturi meter that had been installed some 50 to 60 years ago, and during the winter time we have relatively low flows going through that Venturi, so we're at the edge of its accuracy reading, so we replaced that Venturi with a 24-inch mag meter so we can get all those lower flows accurately registered and make sure that we aren't saying we're delivering more water to the distribution system than what we really are. The next tool that we use were leak loggers. I'm not certain how long they've been out there, but they're certainly more readily available right now. And in comparison to a correlator to listen for leaks, these leak loggers are very small. You can hold them in your hand. They readily fit into valve vaults or valve boxes. And we have about 30 of them in our municipality, and we can go around and set them in different valve structures. And then these loggers come on at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they listen for 5 minutes for a noise. If they don't detect one, they just shut off. If they hear a noise, they turn on again at 4 o'clock in the morning and listen for another 5 minutes. If they hear the noise the second time, then they go into the leak indication. And then we would have to go out with our correlating equipment, which is more time-consuming. You have to stay with your equipment while you're doing this. And that's when you actually pinpoint your leaks. We bought this equipment at the end of 1 year, and we were able to do a third of our city, and then the following year, we were able to do the other 2/3 of the city. This is our third year. We intend to do the entire city, 157 miles, within 1 year. When we first started doing this, we found 3 main breaks and 5 leaks on water services that we had corrected, and we believe that we have stopped 14 million gallons of water annually being wasted through these leaks that were not surfacing to the street and readily identifiable. Another major challenge for Evanston that's impacted by this regulation is that 91 miles of our 157 miles, or 58%, is more than 80 years old. And the construction of water mains back at that time was cast iron pipe with lead caulk joints. They had an allowable leakage rate when they were installed, and those type of joints leak. There's not much that you can do to prevent that. And so we're disappointed that in the unaccounted for water, you were allowed leakage rate through these pipes, through these joints. Now you're not. It's considered non-revenue water. So Evanston is aggressively trying to replace our older water main. We're replacing about 1.5 miles a year at a cost of about $3.5 million a year. And that's very expensive for us to do. We select which mains to replace based on the number of breaks that water main has had. So we have a nice CMMS system that we're recording all this data in. And then it spits out to us which mains we should break or replace. We also look at the hydraulic improvement is needed in that area, or if the street's being resurfaced. Those are kind of the trifecta. If you can get a main with a lot of breaks that should be upsized and we're paving the street, we do those obviously first. But the newer technology allows us to also potentially line water mains using the CIPP process, something that's been done in sewer mains for a long time. It's becoming more recognized in water mains at this point in time. Last year was our first endeavor with this. We lined a 6-inch water main, a water main that was approximately 80 years old. You can see how corroded it was inside of it, and you can see the finished product after it being lined. There were water services on this water main. It was a residential street that we were on, and it became successful, and the cost is actually about 2/3 less than replacing the water main. So with that same $3.5 million, if we can line the water main, we expect to be able to get more than 1.5 miles accomplished in a year. Another project I would like to talk about is Evanston's long-range sewer project. We're one of those older communities that have a combined sewer system. It is vastly undersized, and that's been known since the 1930s when the Public Works Director back then declared that. Not much was done really to improve that situation until August 13th of 1987, when the Chicagoland area had over 9 inches of rain in 24 hours, and all of our basements in Evanston were filled with approximately 7 feet of sewage water. And that's when the City Council decided to take action. We put out a proposal, and we received a very unique design plan from Harza Engineering, now called MWH Americas. And that was a partial separation, and that made our ability to change the system much more feasible. It's a relief sewer system, so it's not just a storm sewer system, it's interconnected with our combined sewer. So if the combined sewer does overflow, it can fall into our relief sewer system. The unique part was that we put restrictors in drainage structures so we didn't have to put the new sewer system on every street in Evanston. We put them on downhill streets, if you will, and we put inlet restrictors in the other structures that were still connected to combined sewer that limit the amount of stormwater going into combined sewer system. And then just even some final details is making sure that you use the correct drainage structure grates. This next map is somewhat hard to read. The lighter blue is an indication of where we put in about 8.5 miles of 60 to 120 inch tunnels that were 60 feet deep. And then we also put in 35 miles of 16 to 54 inch diameter pipe shown on as the darker green lines up there. So this is our relief sewer system. we connect to the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District's deep tunnel. It was a great endeavor for Evanston to be able to have somewhere where we could discharge our sewer to. We wouldn't be able to do what we have done without the district. The restrictors are placed in the drainage structures. These details might be a little bit hard to see, but that's a catch basin drainage structure. And then the outfall pipe, we put in a stainless steel device that creates a vortex as the stormwater leaves through that. It's a two-part system that we can pull the vortex head off of the pipe that slides inside the outfall pipe. So for maintenance, these do get plugged up, but it has not been a maintenance nightmare. A crushed pop can fits really well into that vortex valve, but because we're able to hook it and pull it up to the street level after the rain event is over and clean it out and put it back in relatively easy, it's not been too hard for us to handle. And again, these are only in the structures that are connected, still remain connected to the combined sewer system. And we try to keep the stormwater up on the street and have it flow downhill to the relief sewer system. And the top picture is a picture of our normal drainage structure, and if you do not want stormwater to go into your drainage structure, that's the right lid for it, because flow will go right over that. The picture at the bottom are drainage or grates that East Jordan Iron Works worked with us on, and Nina Foundry as well, but they're veined grates, so as the water flows over it, it's actually pulled into the drainage structure, or sinusoidal grate with the different shape in it that also kind of disrupts the flow of the water down the curb line and lets the water go into the drainage structure. And with that, I'm at the end of my presentation.
Is this on? Okay, I'm going to kick off our discussion with a couple of questions. So Susan talked about some of the incredible infrastructure investments that are happening here in Region 5, and actually Metropolitan Water Reclamation District and also Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District are both part of the Value of Water Coalition. And I have to say that yesterday I was in Cleveland, and we were highlighting for media and the elected officials in the region some of those investments. We actually took a crew of people 240 feet down into the pump station that's being developed that is going to ultimately, when it's up and running, as you mentioned, lead to billions of gallons of sewage not going into Lake Erie. So I just wanted to let you know that it is going well in Cleveland, and it was so cool to be underground to see that. But you know, those investments that are being made in Region 5 and really around the country are 98%, as you know, financed by local ratepayers. It's really quite different than in transportation, where we have a much bigger federal investment being made. And actually, when I was in San Francisco, led the effort for 9% rate increase compounding every year for the next 5 years to do some of those projects that Quinn just talked about. So I guess my first question to all of you is, you know, water and wastewater service is one of the most affordable utilities. Peter, you compared, I think, the cable bill to the transportation bill. On average, the water wastewater bill is about $450 a year. People pay on average $1,500 for cable and even more for cell phones. So, you know, we just don't have that right as far as pricing. And so what is it going to take to really help this nation understand what we need, the investment we need to make, and ultimately how we're going to pay for it?
So would you like me
Yeah, that'd be
to
great.
address that? So I think it might be helpful to preface my response by saying that just prior to this appointment at EPA, I worked for the Illinois Attorney General's office in the utility division there, and was a consumer advocate on energy and water issues. So I understand very, very deeply the ratepayer perspective on this. And this is a major problem for local elected officials and sanitary districts as they attempt to finance these necessary investments. Part of the problem is that in many places, water wasn't even metered. We're certainly familiar with that here in Chicago. People think of water as something that's free, when in fact there are huge costs associated with supplying water and treating water. And I think, here in the Great Lakes region where there is such an abundance of water, this is a particularly difficult sort of message to convey. But I think people are beginning to understand. I will tell you that I find that the most compelling argument that can be made to a community to convince people that it's worthwhile to spend money on sewer upgrades is a picture of a combined sewer overflow in their community. That communicates exactly what's happening. And when you couple that with information about the increased frequency of extreme precipitation events that we're seeing in this region, where we're having a 100-year rain event every year in some cases, in some areas, that helps people to understand that there is an immediate need for action to correct a problem that they don't want to see occurring. One final point, as we conclude all of these settlements, these consent decrees to deal with CSO and other issues, there is a formula that EPA uses that takes into account median income in a community. And we often stretch out the schedule for implementation of the measures required in a settlement to be able to spread out those costs to make them affordable.
So the only thing I would add to that is just that water obviously is really cheap and almost assumed as ubiquitous in most communities, and even in the state of California, which is very dry, we still have people in Palm Springs watering their grass. So clearly the price of water isn't that expensive if they're so able to water grass in a 90-degree heat, incredibly arid community. So we have a pricing problem. And in the next 10 to 15 years, I suspect that a lot of cities and states will increase the price of water for the realities of climate change, for the realities of the infrastructure needs that we're in. And those things should be done in context to the distribution of that price associated to those who can afford it and those who cannot. Unfortunately, in many states, including the state of California, and I'm not sure if it's in Illinois as well, but you have to price your water exactly to how much each individual uses it, not necessarily based on their income. So if someone gets hit with a huge bill, like let's say in Akron, a water quality bill, they might be paying as much as $150 when the median household income is $25,000 a year. And I'm not saying that's a really fair way of addressing infrastructure needs, is to place that burden on the lowest income population across the country.
I think I mentioned in Evanston, it took a severe rain event to have the city take action to improve its sewer system. I was able to start the water replacement program basically by demonstrating a map out of our GIS that just showed the age of the water main. When you put everything that's over 80 years old in orange and everything that's over 100 years old in red, and 2/3 of the map is, red or orange, the aldermen start to understand the serious nature of what's happening. And that's where, I think it's being more transparent. I feel a lot of municipalities, water and sewer, we're underground, we're out of sight, we're out of mind. Let's stay that way. I think that as a municipality, people running their water and sewer divisions need to be more transparent, don't be afraid of the bad news, get it out there so that everybody understands what it is and that they can work as a community to address those situations.
Great, thank you. So Dave, you also in your presentation talked about the collaboration that you have with the Metropolitan Reclamation District, or sewer of Greater Chicago. So tell us a little bit about, as part of Infrastructure Week, I'm actually in a different city every day, really looking at some of the innovation that is happening around water and some of the collaborations that are happening. as we really try to solve this crisis. So talk to us a little bit about some of the collaborations you're seeing, both in the water industry, but with partners outside of water. And anyone can start.
Well, I'll start again. In this region, there is a lot of very exciting collaboration going on. In Milwaukee, in particular, there is an emphasis on partnering businesses that do water, have all kinds of water technologies with businesses that have energy technologies, and they've created an incubator to bring the private sector to this problem, and that is succeeding wildly in Milwaukee. This is also a kind of problem that you can't solve just as a single community. You can't solve it, without collaboration between federal, state, and local officials. It's often best addressed on a regional basis. I've focused primarily on Great Lakes Basin water utilities. In Cincinnati, there are some very exciting things happening in an area of the city where a decision has been made to, rather than build some huge gray infrastructure tunnel, they've decided to completely daylight a stream through about a 2-mile stretch of the community. And it is bringing all kinds of private sector development into that area that is funding the work that's going on there. This is, I think, an example of a kind of project that we'd like to see occur in a lot of cities where there's a private-public partnership. So there are a lot of opportunities, and we're going to have to foster those opportunities to get this work funded.
Do you want to talk about that?
Well, the district has been a great partner for the city of Evanston. They have the bigger manpower, the budget to be able to initiate large programs, rain barrel programs, all sorts of things that they initiate and then give out to the communities that are tributary to them. So Evanston tries to partner with them everywhere we can and take advantage of those opportunities.
Thank you. So maybe we'll take some questions from the audience. Great. Oh, there's.
Hi, morning, Bernard Edelman. First, I wanted to compliment Susan Penman. I'm a victim of that combined water source system with the priority you attach to that is absolutely right. Once it happens to anybody, we don't want it ever to happen again. Mr. Stonebeck, you said something about CIPP delivering a savings of about 2/3. Is that about right?
That is correct.
If that's true, first off, salute Evanston for doing that, but why aren't more communities using CIPP?
For the water main projects, I believe that it's more of a newer technology, and then it's also a challenge sometimes to get the permit to be able to do that as well. The 10 state standards in the state of Illinois require a sewer and water main separation. In Evanston, having been built so long ago, our water mains are less than 10 feet away from the sewer mains. And even though we would line the sewer main and line the water main, they don't give us the permit to do that without a special exception, that at some date they could come back and say we have to correct the situation, get the proper separation. So I think they're a little bit behind the standards on taking into consideration the newer technologies that are available.
Absent that, it would be
Thank you. Again, that's a great answer. So absent this, that would be the state that needs to do a little bit more work in terms of technology and applicable rules?
Well, I believe that Illinois follows the 10 state standards, so it could well be the 10 state standards that should be looking at this. And I believe the states within the 10 states would then follow along.
Got it. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Great. Well, maybe what we will do is I'll ask you a closing question, and then we'll get into lunch. So, we've got we have sort of key leadership from, across Chicago here with us today. What is sort of the one point that you will hope that they will leave with as we think about the challenges in the region around water infrastructure and the opportunities when we reinvest?
Well, I hope there is one very clear message that you might take away from my presentation, and that is that we have a huge and urgent water infrastructure need here in the Great Lakes region. And it is unlikely that there will be federal funding on the horizon that is able to begin to meet all of those needs. Congress does not seem inclined to make that kind of funding available. So consequently, in order to be able to get these infrastructure investments made in a timely fashion, we're going to have to leverage the federal funding that is available, not overburden ratepayers, and that is only possible if we create public-private partnerships to be able to get this infrastructure investment. And as we saw from your presentation, there are so many co-benefits associated with this investment that the possibilities for public-private collaboration here are almost endless, and we hope to be able to work with you to start making that happen.
I would say the number one thing I'd recommend is that you guys play together. You need to recognize that there are a number of co-benefits and opportunities to invest together, both on the transportation and water side. So often I've seen examples where a street is redone and then 3 weeks later, pipe comes in right after. Or worse, you have green infrastructure being put into place and no account was put into for the BRT system that was coming in 3 years later. So often these things can be combined together and create consolidated infrastructure solutions that provide broader community benefit. And it would be great if the transportation folks in the room took a card from the water folks in the room.
All right, May Madness, vote water. No, I think people need to realize the true cost of water. I think that it's been too long expected that you just turn on your kitchen tap and you get water out of it, and it's magically there for free, and that is not the case, and people need to come to that realization.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists.